Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1091 just came out, and one of my favorite aspects of what we've been getting so far in the final saga is exactly what we saw in this chapter, which is taking characters that we've known for a long time, that we've liked quite a bit in the, peripherals of the One Piece universe, and taking those type of side characters and adding so much more weight, depth, and characterization to them, kind of changing our prior perception of who they are and adding to the ideas of the story in the process. And in this chapter, I'm specifically, of course, referring to Kizaru and Sentomaru and their relationship. Because what's so interesting is just a few chapters back, with the storyline of Hachinosu, we got a sort of parallel situation with the storyline of Garp and Aokiji, where you've got pretty much the same thing. You've got one character who is staunchly still on the side of the Marines, who essentially mentored or had a certain protege that they kind of raised and who took after them in a lot of ways, right? Garp with Aokiji, and here we have Sentomaru and Kizaru. They kind of took them under their wing, and guided them on their path up the Marines and on the world government side. And these figures, right, Garp and Kizaru, are now coming up against their former pupils, their former disciples, who they have almost a father-son sort of relationship with, and they're having to go up against them with their disciple now on the other side. And they can't quite understand why that is, but both Garp and Kizaru are still going to stick to what they believe is the correct path, which is obviously the Marines. That's what you're supposed to be on, right? They don't understand exactly that the stances that Aokiji is taking, that Sentomaru is taking, they're coming from a different place. The irony is that Garp and Kizaru both believe that the side that they're on is, it's the side of justice. It's the side that you're supposed to be on. When in reality, we the reader understand that whatever Aokiji has realized, right? From Garp's perspective, it's like, why are you allying with the Blackbeard Pirates? Well, Oda's showing us that Aokiji has some ulterior motive, some internal motivation that he has not yet revealed to the reader, but we understand that Aokiji is most likely coming from a good place and trying to follow his own sense of justice rather than blindly following whatever the Marines are doing. So there's more to what Aokiji is doing than Garp is aware of. Garp simply thinks in black and white still that he's on the correct side and Aokiji has gone off to the wrong side. Kizaru, he likely views Sentomaru in the same light, right? Kizaru thinks, as he said a couple chapters ago, that, I'm just following orders, I just do what I'm told. He believes that the Marines are basically the correct side to be executing the orders of, and he is not fully on board with the fact that Sentomaru is falling prey, I suppose, to sentimental values and honoring his relationship with Vegapunk. At the same time, we can see that Kizaru is, in some ways, just by the flashbacks that he's having, same as Garp was having with Aokiji, they're remembering the personal bonds that are at play here. So while on the one hand, Kizaru seems like the villain in this scenario, Oda is choosing to show that there is more happening underneath the surface. Kizaru is experiencing something as he goes after Sentomaru, as he goes after the Straw Hats, as he will soon have to go and try and kill Vegapunk. There are actual emotions and nuance to the type of character that he is, just because he's on the side of the Marines and he doesn't understand why his allies, Sentomaru and Vegapunk, are doing what they're doing. That doesn't mean that he's just some sort of robot that is blindly following orders. There is more to Kizaru's character that is to be explored in the Egghead Island arc, and I'm not saying that we're going to go into some really deep thing and Kizaru's going to totally change the character. It would be cool to see, but I think just the fact that Oda is addressing these sort of aspects that are going on underneath the veneer of what we assumed Kizaru is, just this guy that will do whatever he's told. No, there is conflict, internal conflict that is happening with him. Same as Garp was experiencing with Aokiji. They both have these emotional bonds to these characters, and they both see these characters as having essentially lost their way. Of course, again, irony being that what Sentomaru is doing, we the reader know is the right thing to do. What Aokiji was doing, we the reader don't know exactly why Aokiji is doing it yet, but we do know that Aokiji is ultimately a good character who has his own unique motivations for joining the Blackbeard Pirates, and he doesn't just want to see the world burn. So I love the parallels that we're getting here. I think the fact that Oda is delving into the Marines more than anything, and the characters that are essentially on the world government side, but slowly realizing the problems with the world government side, or having to grapple with the evils of the world government, have to grapple with what the world government is making them do. That's taking place over the course of this final saga, especially in Egghead Island, and I think that that's such an interesting way to flesh out so many of these prior characters that we kind of just took for granted. Like, for a long time, I just took Kizaru for granted as, the cool admiral with a powerful ability that he doesn't have to be as important of a character as Akainu or Aokiji. But at this point, I'm like, no, I want to know more about what Kizaru's thinking. Even if Luffy beats Kizaru here, which I do believe Luffy will, I don't want to see Kizaru just exit the story. I want to see if he learns something from this experience, or if his encounter with Straw Hat Luffy, or his encounter with, all of the cast of Egghead Island, right? If he gets an interaction with Vegapunk, I want to see how that goes. I want to see if there's potential for change or understanding there, because it seems like Oda is trying to write in the idea that it's not as simple as Kizaru's just going to come in and cold-bloodedly murder Vegapunk if that's what he's told to do. I feel like there is something more underneath there just based on the flashbacks that Kizaru is going through. So I love that aspect of the final saga. I feel like this is going to be, if this is what we're getting with so many of the side characters, right? Like Koby, Aokiji, Garp, Kizaru, even Sentomaru. I never thought I'd get a chapter where I was actually emotionally invested in Sentomaru's story. If we're getting so much for these side characters, I feel like the final saga is set up to be, writing-wise, maybe, at least character writing-wise, maybe the best saga, the best storyline that One Piece has ever had. Because if Oda's got this cooking for the side characters, then at least for the Straw Hats, the main characters like Sabo or Vivi, it's gonna be, the ideas that I'm sure he has planned for them is gonna be on a totally different level. So I'm loving that aspect. And then on the flip side, we do have to talk a little bit about, the action that we're seemingly set up to get. I know a lot of people want to see Zoro versus Kizaru. Some people want to see Sanji versus Kizaru. Some people want to see Sanji and Zoro versus Kizaru. Well, ultimately what we're getting is more realistic, which is, look, Luffy's always gonna fight the toughest character, right? Luffy versus Kizaru, it feels right, because if you go back to Marineford, Kizaru, over the course of Sabaody and Marineford, yes, Akainu did the most to him at Marineford, but that was one moment. Kizaru has really been practically this bully for Luffy over the course of that entire Marineford saga, starting with Sabaody through the actual Marineford arc. You have Kizaru just humiliating Luffy at every turn, and particularly in the Marineford saga, Kizaru is the one taunting him, saying, "It's too early for you to be here," kicking Luffy around 3 times over the course of the Marineford arc. Kizaru is really this huge obstacle, and just like, really, honestly, if you go back and read that arc, he bullies Luffy over the course of that arc. So to see things come all the way full circle, and see now, like, Luffy showing up and being so confident and ready to take Kizaru, and it feels as though Kizaru's the one that should be worried, I feel like there's a very satisfying sense of comeuppance that we're about to get right here in the next few chapters. And one of my favorite ways that Oda wrote, my favorite decisions that Oda had when it came to writing this reunion between Luffy and Kizaru, is how Luffy started the fight, because we know Kizaru as the guy that zips in really fast and delivers a really powerful kick. Nobody's prepared for him. That's Kizaru's MO, right? That's the image you kind of have when you think of Admiral Kizaru coming after a character, right? This blindingly fast character that comes in with a really powerful kick and sends somebody flying. How does Oda have Luffy start the fight against Kizaru? By showing up and hitting him with a super fast kick out of nowhere. This time, it's Kizaru experiencing basically what it's like to get Kizaru'd, right? Character blitzes him out of nowhere, hits him with a really hard kick. Yes, it seems like Kizaru was fine. I don't think he was damaged by that, but that kick clearly shook him up and pushed him back. And I don't know, I feel like Kizaru is about to be in over his head against Luffy in this fight. I don't think that Luffy is going to low diff him or anything like that necessarily. Let's just say I don't think Luffy is going to have the same level of difficulty as he did against Kaido. I might be wrong, maybe I'm underestimating Kizaru here, but it just feels that way to me at this moment in time. And that brings us, of course, to the other matchup, Zoro versus Lucci, where again, people forget this, but Zoro has, a bit of revenge to take on Lucci as well. Lucci is one of the few characters that has actually just beaten Zoro throughout the series, and Zoro never got a second shot at him. If you remember in Water 7, that was a rare case where you had the villain actually take out Luffy and Zoro back to back. Luffy, of course, got his revenge by the end of Enies Lobby, but Zoro never did. I think it'd be kind of cool to see basically how Zoro stacks up against Lucci now. I think we all assume that Zoro's going to win. The level of difficulty, who knows? I assume it will be with slightly higher difficulty, maybe more than slightly higher difficulty. Well, it will be with more difficulty than Luffy had with Lucci, of course. But at the same time, maybe I'm just being too optimistic here, but I think that Zoro will be able to handle Lucci pretty decently well by the end of this arc. So I think that this is a good showcase for both the characters to see how far they've come. I think it kind of sucks that we didn't see anything for Sanji because, it sometimes it's so weird. Sometimes it feels like Oda's trying to give shine to all three of the monster trio, with each one of them getting a Seraphim matchup, Luffy against Kuma, Zoro against Mihawk, Sanji against Jinbei. And then you cut away and we don't really get to see those fights, and instead we're getting Luffy versus Kizaru, Zoro versus Lucci, and Sanji using a bubble gun to take out Kaku, who's already very injured. But people have been talking that Lafitte is still on the island, so maybe that's a hidden opponent that is being saved for Sanji. We don't know. Plus, there's a bunch of Vice Admirals out there. Sanji could maybe go flex against some of them. Either way, I think it's very interesting that the main boss that we all thought of the arc, the guy we all thought was going to be the final boss of the arc, Saturn, is still waiting on the ship. So is Kizaru Luffy's final opponent for this arc, or is Saturn still going to be waiting around the corner to actually cut in and be the final big bad? It would be kind of crazy if Kizaru, an admiral, is just a warm-up match for Luffy at this point, but who knows? I think we really can't underestimate Luffy at this point in the story, or at the very least, I think there's no such thing as overestimating Luffy at this point in the story, just because I think he's capable of so much, and we know that in an arc or two he's going to be basically meeting up again with Shanks, which means that at Elbaf most likely, which means that by that point in time, he basically needs to be able to stand toe-to-toe with Shanks, as equal pirates, as equally great pirates. So I do still feel that this whole Egghead Island arc is set to be a really big flex arc for the Straw Hats, but again, beyond all of that, beyond the cool matchups that we're getting, the most interesting part to me is the characterization and the character writing that we seem to be getting in the final saga. I personally think it's a cut above anything that we were getting in most recent arcs post-time skip, at least in terms of my level of investment in terms of which characters we're getting these storylines around. I love seeing storylines around Garp, around Aokiji, against even Kizaru and even Sentomaru at this point, because these are characters that were so interesting to us for so long and such major staples of the story for such a long period of time. To finally be getting to delve in and really understand what makes them tick, what is the full character that Oda has thought out in his head, and what's the full storyline that he's thought out in his head for each of these guys. I think that is just, we're set for the most interesting stretch of One Piece ever. And, I can't wait for, I don't even mind the breaks because there's so much to talk about from each chapter, but still can't wait for 1092 and can't wait for the One Piece live action. I'll probably be watching it by the time that this video comes out. So talk to y'all later.